No one had ever seen Shadow hesitate to come home. But that night, he didn't just hesitate. He backed away. The porch light flickered weakly through the rising fog. A gust of wind carried the scent of lake water and wood smoke through the trees. The dog stood just beyond the steps, one foreleg trembling slightly, his breath curled in white streams against the cold night air. The door creaked open. Rebecca Sloane stood in the doorway, her face hollow, lips pressed thin as wire. Her red flannel robe clung to her thin frame, and her hands, pale and clenched, gripped the doorframe like it was the only thing holding her upright. "You have no right to be here," she whispered. Her voice shook, not with fear, but rage. Shadow didn't move. Behind her, Mark Sloane emerged, flashlight still in hand from the search that had ended in tragedy. The light trembled in his grip. His jaw was locked tight, a storm swelling behind his eyes. "You dragged him out there, didn't you?" Mark rasped, stepping past his wife. "He followed you, and you let him die." Shadow shifted his weight, but stayed silent. His eyes, deep and amber in the light, did not flinch. They pleaded. They asked. "Why?" Rebecca's voice rose, sharp and brittle. "You killed our boy!" The flashlight clattered to the floor as Mark turned away, shoulders caving inward. Rebecca stepped forward. "You cursed dog! Get out of my house, out of my life! I don't want to see you again!" Ever Shadow lowered his head. He didn't growl, didn't bark, he didn't bare his teeth. He simply took a step back, then another, until his paws reached the edge of the gravel driveway. The porch light buzzed above him. No one called him back. No one asked if he was cold, or hungry, or hurting. Then the door slammed shut. Shadow stood there for a long moment. The silence that followed was heavier than the fog, heavier than the grief. And then he turned. The mist swallowed him in seconds. His paws left no mark on the frozen ground. He didn't look back. Just like that, the dog who had never left Caleb's side was alone. Edgefield, Oregon, was a town of pine needles and silences. Tucked between the lake and the forest, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, or thought they did. Tragedy didn't come often, but when it did, it stayed. Caleb Sloane had been the light of his parents' world. A bright-eyed 8-year-old boy who collected pine cones like treasure and told people his best friend was a retired war hero. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He had once been deployed in Afghanistan, a bomb-sniffing K-9 with 3 confirmed saves and a commendation. After his handler passed, he was adopted by the Sloanes. Rebecca thought the companionship would be good for Caleb, and it had been, until the day Caleb didn't come back. They found him in the lake, tangled in reeds, no signs of foul play, no wounds. Official cause, accidental drowning. But that didn't soothe. Rebecca. She needed a reason, a villain. And Shadow had come home soaked and silent. Now he was gone. 2 miles away, in a dimly lit apartment above the Edgefield Police Department, Officer Daniel Reeves stood in front of his cracked bathroom mirror, brushing his teeth like he did every night. The routine helped. Keep moving. Keep doing. The silence in his apartment was familiar now. After his wife's accident, Daniel had transferred to Edgefield for the quiet. He didn't get close to people anymore. Not really, not since Duke. But that night, something gnawed at him. A call he hadn't responded to. A report he hadn't filed. A feeling. He grabbed his keys and headed back to the cruiser, radioing in for a late patrol along the lake road. Fog clung to the pine trunks like ghost fingers. It was near Hollow Creek Bridge that he saw it. A shape. Limping. Moving slowly through the mist like it had nowhere else to go. He slowed the cruiser. The dog paused in the middle of the road, one paw lifted slightly off the ground. Its fur was damp, its gait uneven. But its eyes, those eyes locked onto Daniel's like they recognized something. Daniel exhaled hard. "Shadow?" He'd seen the name in the file. K9 veteran, attached to Caleb Sloan, discharged with distinction. The dog stepped forward, not begging, not panicked, just there. Daniel didn't open the door. Not yet. He just watched as Shadow moved to the side of the road, lay down in the weeds, and curled into a shivering ball. Something was wrong, not just physically. This dog wasn't lost, he was grieving. At sunrise, Mark Sloan sat alone on the porch steps, a mug of coffee going cold in his hands. Rebecca hadn't come out of the bedroom since the night before. The searchlight still lay on the ground near the driveway. Something rustled in the trees, but he didn't look. A week ago, Shadow would have been asleep by Caleb's feet, snoring softly, dreaming dog dreams. Now the house was silent, except for the creaks of old wood and the occasional sob muffled by walls. Mark looked out toward the lake. He wasn't sure what he believed anymore. By mid-morning, Daniel had brought Shadow to the vet down the street. No microchip, but the tags were still on. The vet cleaned the bleeding paw, wrapped it tightly, and commented on the old scar near the back leg. "That's surgical," she murmured. "Military or law enforcement dog. See how clean the line is? This guy's seen things." Daniel didn't respond. He just looked at Shadow, who was watching the door like someone might still come for him. But no one did. Back at the station, Daniel let Shadow rest in the storage room beside the break area. The dog barely moved. He hadn't touched food, hadn't made a sound, until Daniel said the name. "Caleb." Shadow lifted his head. Not just lifted, snapped up. His ears perked, his whole body shifted. Daniel stared. "You remember him?" he whispered. Shadow's tail thumped once, slow, then again. Outside, a storm was gathering. The wind pulled at the eaves of the old police station, whistling through unseen cracks. But inside, something small, something important had begun. Daniel knelt beside the dog. "I don't know what happened out there," he said, "but I don't think you're the one to blame." Shadow didn't bark. He didn't move. He didn't need to. His eyes said enough. The fog along Lake Helmer drifted like breath from something long dead, curling low across the water and swallowing the gravel roads that spidered out from Edgefield's town square. It was just past midnight when Officer Daniel Reeves cut the headlights and pulled his cruiser to the shoulder of West Shore Drive. He hadn't intended to be out this late. Officially, his shift had ended an hour ago, but the silence of his apartment had felt heavier than usual. Something about the night wouldn't let him sleep. Something about the fog. The radio crackled quietly, then went still. Daniel rubbed his palms along the steering wheel. 40 minutes of driving aimlessly through the back roads and nothing. No speeding teens, no coyote calls, not even a flicker of a porch light out of place. He was about to turn around when he saw it. A figure, moving slow, limping. At first it looked like a wild animal, big, hunched, dragging a paw, but then it stepped into the dim cut of moonlight through the trees. A dog. German Shepherd. Sable fur streaked with silver. Daniel sat frozen, breath caught in his throat. The dog turned its head slightly, and for a moment Daniel could have sworn those eyes glowed. He opened the door and stepped out. The cold bit into him immediately. The shepherd didn't move. It stood at the edge of the road, chest rising and falling with a deep, exhausted rhythm. Its front right paw was lifted just off the ground, and its left ear bent slightly at the tip. "Hey," Daniel called softly. Still no movement, just that stare. He took a slow step forward, boots crunching against the gravel. "You're Shadow," he said. "Aren't you?" The dog blinked. Not a twitch of fear, not a sound. Daniel remembered the name from the case file. K9, retired. Adopted by the Sloan family after service overseas, bonded with Caleb, then blamed for his death. And yet here he was, alone, limping, watching. Daniel crouched. "You're not just wandering, are you? You're looking for something." The dog took one tentative step forward, then stopped. Daniel didn't reach for him. He just stayed still, letting the silence settle between them like a fragile truce. "You hungry?" he asked after a moment. "I've got a protein bar in the car." "It's not steak, but—" That's when Shadow turned and walked off the road. Daniel stood quickly. "Wait, where are you going?" He followed. The dog limped toward the lake, slipping silently between trees, tail low but steady. Daniel kept a few paces behind, heart pounding harder than he liked to admit. The fog thickened the closer they got to the water. Branches clawed at his sleeves. And then Shadow stopped. They were at the edge of a clearing. An old footpath ended in a rotted bench, half buried in leaves. A narrow trail of mud led from there to the water, disappearing into reeds. Shadow sat down near the bench. He didn't whine, didn't look back, just stared out over the lake. Daniel stepped beside him, breath clouding in the cold. "Is this where it happened?" he asked quietly. The dog didn't move. The police report had said Caleb was last seen around here, playing near the lake, alone. No one saw him fall. No one heard a scream. When the search team found him hours later, his body had drifted beneath the inlet's brush line. Shadow had returned home soaked and shaking. The conclusion had been swift. The boy had followed the dog. The dog had led him to his death. But Daniel had read the autopsy. No trauma. No signs of being pulled. Just water in the lungs. He looked down at Shadow. "You stayed, didn't you?" The dog's eyes met his. Something passed between them. Not understanding exactly, but recognition. Daniel knelt slowly. "You waited by the lake." All this time, the wind picked up. Leaves rattled like bones across the ground. Shadow shifted, stood, and limped forward, nose to the ground. He began sniffing with sudden purpose, circling near the base of the bench. His tail lifted slightly, ears alert. "What is it?" The dog scratched at a patch of wet leaves, paw careful despite the limp. Daniel stepped closer and pushed aside a layer of brush. There was something buried in the soil, a small canvas pouch, stained and half-rotted. Daniel reached in with a pen from his pocket and hooked it out. The fabric was slick, greasy. He unzipped it. Inside were 3 tightly sealed packets wrapped in cloudy plastic. He didn't need a field test to guess. Drugs. Likely fentanyl or heroin. Street cut. His jaw tightened. "What the hell is this doing out here?" Shadow sat beside him, watching silently. This area had been searched during the investigation, but not thoroughly. It had been labeled a child's accident. No need to dig further. Until now. Daniel sealed the pouch in an evidence bag from his cruiser. When he returned, Shadow was still sitting at the edge of the path, staring towards the lake. "Looks like you just reopened a case, partner," Daniel said. Shadow's ears flicked. Daniel couldn't explain it. Why he believed the dog, why he trusted the instinct of a creature the town had turned its back on. But something deeper than logic pulled at him. Grief had a scent, and this dog had been following it longer than anyone else. As they walked back to the car, Shadow followed without command. He climbed into the back seat like he had done it before, curled tightly into the blanket Daniel tossed over the seat. His eyes remained open, watching, as if he knew the town wasn't done with him yet, and he wasn't done with the truth. The morning came grey and quiet, as if the sun had second thoughts about rising. A low mist rolled off Lake Helmer, hanging just above the water like a veil, and the pines that lined the shoreline stood motionless. Edgefield was still waking up, but Officer Daniel Reeves had already been on the move for hours. He parked the cruiser on the south end of the lake, away from the public trailheads. No playgrounds, no families, just broken reeds, frost-bitten weeds, and a silence that felt more watchful than peaceful. In the back seat, Shadow stirred as Daniel opened the door. The dog moved with more strength today. His limp was still there, but less pronounced. The swelling in his paw had gone down, and the fire in his eyes had returned. Daniel clipped on the makeshift leash. "Back to where you left off, huh?" Shadow didn't need coaxing. His nose lifted into the cold air, ears twitching. Then he started forward, steady, deliberate, as if he knew exactly where he was going. They walked through a patch of frozen mud and followed a barely there path that curved behind a cluster of rocks and disappeared into marshy brush. Daniel recognized the area. The original search team had marked it as low risk. Shallow water, no sharp drops, no current. But they hadn't brought Shadow. The dog stopped suddenly. He stiffened, body tense, nose low, his tail lifted halfway, his head tilting slightly as he sniffed along the base of a half-rotted bench. His movement changed, more focused, sharper. He circled, then scratched once at the soil with his uninjured paw. Daniel crouched, brushing away leaves. The pouch was buried just beneath the surface. Dirty canvas. Small. Could have been anything. But the weight of it, and the way Shadow sat beside it like he'd just uncovered a secret, told Daniel this wasn't lost camping gear. He opened it slowly. Inside were 4 plastic-wrapped packets. Off-white powder, compressed, sealed tight. Street-cut narcotics, no doubt. Daniel let out a breath. This doesn't belong here. Shadow didn't move. He just watched, ears still up, eyes locked on Daniel like he was waiting for him to connect the dots. And Daniel was. A child drowns in a spot known for being safe. The only witness is a dog. A month later, in that same spot, a canine leads an officer to a hidden stash of drugs. This wasn't a coincidence. Not anymore. He pulled an evidence bag from his jacket pocket and sealed the pouch inside, then scanned the shoreline. No tire marks, no footprints, just layers of damp decay. Whoever left the stash here had been careful, or had done it long enough to know where to hide things. Someone used this place. Daniel muttered, standing. Someone who knew no one would come looking. Shadow turned back towards the trail. He took a few steps, then stopped and looked over his shoulder. Daniel followed. They circled the shoreline, past a collapsed boat dock and a narrow inlet nearly hidden by cattails. The water here was deeper, darker, and quieter. Even the wind didn't reach it. Shadow sniffed the edges, ears twitching. He let out a soft huff and padded along the bank, occasionally glancing at Daniel. "You think this is where it happened?" The dog lowered his head and pawed gently at a small pile of stones. Daniel knelt again. This time, buried under sticks and soaked pine needles, he found something small and faded. He pulled it free. A child's shoe. Canvas. Blue. The toe torn open. Daniel turned it over in his hands. No bite marks. No fraying from an animal. But the side had been cleanly ripped, like it had caught on metal. A boat propeller. A sharp corner. Shadow stood perfectly still beside him. This was Caleb's. Daniel said quietly. He remembered the photos. This matched. He bagged it carefully. Back at the cruiser, he placed the evidence in the trunk, then opened the passenger door for Shadow. The dog didn't jump in immediately. Instead, he sat at the edge of the gravel and stared back towards the lake. His ears twitched at a distant sound, maybe wind, maybe memory. Daniel waited beside him. "You saw more than anyone else, didn't you?" he said. Shadow blinked. Daniel didn't need an answer. What struck him wasn't just the discovery of the drugs or the shoe, it was the timing. The dog had waited. He hadn't just survived, he had stayed. And now, step by step, he was leading Daniel back to something everyone else had missed. By the time they reached the station, the clouds had thickened. Rain tapped gently against the windshield. Inside the cruiser, Shadow lay still in the back, eyes open, tracking every movement outside like a sentinel. Daniel parked around back and took the evidence inside. In the supply room, Shadow curled into his usual spot beside the heater. His breathing had steadied, his body relaxed, but his eyes never left the door. Daniel pulled up the Sloan file and added new entries. Found narcotics, location West Bank Inlet. Found child's shoe, location coordinates match location of Caleb Sloan's body recovery. His pen paused. Possibility. Child may have witnessed illegal exchange. He underlined it twice. That night, Daniel stayed late at the station, reading old reports, maps, and logs from the search party. He found gaps, areas overlooked, statements taken in haste. Shadow didn't sleep. Every time Daniel looked up, the dog was watching him. Daniel stood, stretched his back, and walked over. "You're not just a dog," he said. "You're a witness." Shadow let out a soft, steady breath, and for the first time since Daniel had met him, his tail thumped quietly against the floor. The storm outside finally broke. But inside the station, something deeper had just begun. By late morning, the fog had lifted from Edgefield streets, but the tension in town hung like smoke that wouldn't clear. Word had spread fast, too fast. The rumors were always faster than the truth. It started with a phone call, then another. By noon, Officer Daniel Reeves was already fielding questions from local business owners, churchgoers, and one city council member who called just to say, "You're playing with fire, keeping that dog." He hung up without responding. Inside the station, Shadow lay quietly by the radiator in Daniel's office, ears perked but unmoving. He didn't bark, he didn't whimper, but every time someone passed the glass door, his eyes tracked them, alert, aware. Daniel was halfway through his report when the front door slammed open. Rebecca Sloan walked in, sharp-shouldered in a long wool coat, boots still wet from the outside. Her eyes were glassy but hard, her lips drawn in a tight line. Mark followed a step behind, slower, quieter, holding his breath like he wasn't sure if he should be there at all. Daniel stood before they even reached the desk. "Mrs. Sloan," he started, but she cut him off. "Is it true?" Her voice was thin, cracking at the edges, but it was her eyes that carried the blade. Daniel straightened. "If you're referring to Shadow, yes. I've been housing him temporarily. He's under observation. Observation." Her voice rose, brittle and sharp. "That dog should be put down, not protected." Mark shifted beside her. "Rebecca, maybe we should—" "No," she snapped. "No more soft words. That dog is the reason our son is dead." Daniel didn't flinch. "There's no evidence of that. There's no evidence proving he didn't either." She shot back. "You think because he looks sad and limps around he's innocent?" "He didn't run away," Daniel said evenly. "He stayed. Near the lake, in the cold, for weeks." "That proves nothing," she spat, but something in Mark's face said it proved everything. Daniel opened a folder on the desk, sliding a photo across. "We found this buried near the western bank. A canvas pouch. Inside drugs. Less than 50 yards from where Caleb was found." Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. Mark leaned in slightly. "You think someone was out there?" Daniel nodded. "I think Caleb might have seen something he wasn't supposed to." "And I think Shadow tried to intervene." Rebecca's face contorted. "You're twisting this. You're trying to make that dog into some kind of hero." "No," Daniel said calmly. "I'm trying to figure out what really happened, and that dog is the only one still alive who was there." A long silence. Then Rebecca stepped back from the desk like she couldn't stand being near it. "I'm filing a formal complaint." she said. "I want him removed. I want him euthanized. That dog is a threat, and if you won't protect this town from him, I will find someone who will." Mark didn't say a word. He just looked at Daniel, then at the door to his office, where Shadow sat, watching them silently through the glass. Daniel met his gaze. "I don't think your son would have wanted—" This Rebecca froze. Then, with a voice that was suddenly shaking, she whispered, "You didn't know him." She turned and left without looking back. Mark lingered a moment longer. Then followed. Daniel stood alone behind the desk, the sound of their footsteps fading into the winter wind outside. The pushback didn't stop there. By the end of the day, the mayor's office had left a voicemail requesting a review of animal custody protocols. A town councilman dropped by unannounced, peered into Daniel's office and muttered, "I thought you were smarter than this." Even the vet tech who had wrapped Shadow's paw 2 days ago avoided eye contact at the gas station. At the diner, Daniel's usual table was full, not with people, but with silence. He ate alone at the counter. "You're making folks nervous," said the waitress softly as she poured his coffee. Daniel looked up. "Because I'm not throwing away a dog who stayed with a dead child until he almost froze?" She glanced around. "Because they're scared that if you're right, they were all wrong." He didn't finish the coffee. That night, back at the station, Daniel unlocked the storage room and let Shadow stretch his legs. The dog padded out slowly, sniffed the corners of the hallway, then trotted ahead toward the back office like it was already his. Daniel followed. "You're not making this easy, you know," he said as he closed the door behind them. Shadow sat near the chair. He didn't look tired. He looked patient. Daniel lowered himself into his seat, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The whole town's turning on me. And I'm not even sure what I'm chasing yet." Shadow tilted his head. Daniel stared at him. "What did you see?" The dog blinked once, then stood. He walked to the side of the desk where the boy's sketchbook lay, left behind by Ellie Trin, Caleb's 3rd grade teacher, earlier that morning. Daniel had only flipped through it once, barely noticing the drawings. Shadow nudged it with his nose. Daniel froze. He picked it up slowly, turning the pages. There were drawings of the lake, of trees, of boats, of Shadow. And on one page, one Daniel hadn't noticed before, was something else. A figure, tall, faceless, standing beside a small boat. A second figure, small, with scribbled hair, stood on the shore. Shadow was in the drawing, between them. Daniel stared at it, heart quickening. "You saw this, didn't you?" he whispered. Shadow let out a soft, almost inaudible whine. Daniel turned to the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered against the dark. The town could throw its stones, but Shadow had stayed. Caleb had trusted him, and now the only way to uncover the truth was to keep listening to the one who hadn't walked away. He looked back at the dog. "I believe you," he said. And Shadow, quiet as always, lowered his head and stayed by the door. Watching, waiting, guarding. The wind had changed. Daniel felt it before he even stepped outside. It wasn't the temperature. It was something underneath the air, like the town itself was holding its breath. He didn't expect company when he pulled up to the station that morning. But standing by the front steps, coat zipped to her chin, a worn leather folder clutched to her chest, was Ellie Trin, Caleb's 3rd grade teacher. She was quiet by nature, mid-40s, petite, with dark eyes that always seemed to notice more than she said. Her short black hair was tucked under a knit hat. She looked like she hadn't slept. Daniel parked and approached slowly. "Miss Trin?" She nodded once. "I didn't know who else to bring this to." She held out the folder like it weighed more than it should. Daniel took it, opening the flap. Inside was a spiral-bound sketchbook, the cover frayed and softened with use. He recognized Caleb's name printed in block letters on the inside. Property of Caleb Sloan. Ellie looked down. He used to draw all the time. During lunch, after recess, even during math if I let him. Most of it was just animals, trucks, sometimes shadow. But a few weeks before he died, his drawings changed, got darker. He said he'd seen something down at the lake. Daniel flipped through slowly. At first, it was what she said. Dogs, trees, boats. But then came the ones that stopped him cold. Shadow, always shadow, standing between the lake and a boat. A small boy drawn beside him, the height barely up to the dog's shoulder. On the boat, in several pictures, stood a tall figure. Always faceless, sometimes wearing a cap, sometimes not, always looming. In one drawing, the boat sat low in the water. A bag was being passed between two men. In another, Shadow's posture was stiff, alert, guarding. Daniel turned the book toward her. "Why didn't anyone see this earlier? I tried," she said quietly. "But after Caleb died, people just wanted to move on. They wanted the story simple." Daniel nodded. He knew that story. He'd seen it too many times. Blame fills a space faster than grief ever could. "Thank you for bringing this," he said. "Really." Before she could reply, the door behind them pushed open. Shadow stood just inside the threshold. His ears perked, eyes fixed on the sketchbook in Daniel's hands. A low, almost involuntary whine slipped from his throat. Ellie took a half step back. Shadow moved forward slowly. His nose twitched. Then, as Daniel turned the page again to the image of the faceless man on the boat, Shadow stopped. His whole body stiffened. One paw lifted, his ears locked forward like radar. "You recognize this, don't you?" Daniel whispered. The dog's response wasn't loud, just a single, low growl, deep, controlled. Not anger, alertness, a soldier's sound. Ellie's eyes widened. "He knows that man." Daniel nodded. "I think he does." Back in his office, Daniel pinned the sketches on a whiteboard, side by side with the photos of the recovered pouch and Caleb's torn shoe. The map of the lake sat beneath it all. Red marks outlined the western inlet, the playground path, and now a spot near the old service dock. Forgotten, rotting, overgrown. The town called it Old Mill Landing, though the mill it was named after had burned down decades ago. No official patrols went there anymore, just fishermen, teenagers, or those who didn't want to be seen. Daniel sat back, staring at the board, trying to connect what Caleb had seen, what Shadow remembered, and what no one had cared enough to ask. Shadow lay on the floor nearby, eyes half-lidded, head resting on his paws. But his ears flicked every time Daniel moved, as if ready for the next cue. "You led me to the drugs," Daniel said aloud. "You led me to the shoe. And now the kid's sketchbook lines up with what you've been trying to show me." Shadow didn't move, but when Daniel stood, the dog did too. Slow, steady, ready. Old Mill Landing was nearly an hour's drive around the lake, accessible only by a dirt road that hadn't been maintained in years. Daniel kept the windows cracked. Pine and lake air mixed with something else now. Diesel, maybe. Or the faint sour trace of old gasoline. The road narrowed, branches brushing the cruiser as it bounced over roots and frost-hardened ruts. Eventually, he parked at a bend where the trail ended. From there, it was on foot. Shadow moved ahead of him. Not fast, but with purpose. He sniffed low, pausing often, circling brush piles and pausing near rusted beer cans, old wrappers, and a broken folding chair that looked 20 years out of place. Then he stopped. Ahead was the old dock, collapsed in places, the boards warped and slick with algae. A shattered rowboat leaned on its side in the reeds, and behind it, tucked under overgrowth, was a shed. The roof caved in, door hanging crooked. Shadow didn't growl, but he stood tall, ears up, tail stiff. Daniel drew closer. He stepped onto the first board of the dock. It creaked beneath his weight. He knelt near one of the support beams and ran his fingers along a dark stain. Oily, still fresh. He turned to the shed. Approaching it, he noticed rope. Frayed, torn, trailing from the side of the dock into the water. It matched the kind they'd recovered with Caleb's shoe. Shadow sniffed the base of the door, then sat, unmoving. Daniel pushed the door open. Inside was empty, save for a rusted metal gas can, a length of chain, and a pile of mouldy tarps. But it was the wall that made him pause. Scraped into the wood were markings, deep gouges, almost like claw marks, but wrong. Too clean. Too even. Daniel stepped out into the light again and looked across the lake. It was quiet here. Too quiet, but not forgotten. He turned back to Shadow. You knew this place. You remembered the dog's tail thumped once. Daniel crouched beside him and ran a hand down his side. As his palm moved along the hind leg, he felt it again. The scar. Clean. Surgical. But with a story that hadn't been told yet. You're not just showing me clues, Daniel said. You're showing me what Caleb saw. Shadow leaned his head against Daniel's shoulder for a moment. Just enough. Then he pulled away, eyes locking on the dock again. Still waiting. Still guarding. And Daniel knew this wasn't over. It was only beginning. The morning sky bled color slowly over Lake Helmer, streaks of dull pink and silver cutting through heavy cloud cover. Cold air pushed low across the water, and the reeds along the shoreline stood stiff and frosted like brittle fingers. It was the kind of morning that kept most people inside. Daniel Reeves was not most people. He parked the cruiser off the service road, near where the old dock curled into the inlet. Shadow leapt down from the back seat, his movements sharper now, more fluid. Whatever exhaustion had dulled him in the first days was gone. He was alert, focused, and leading again. Daniel clipped the leash but left it slack. You brought me this far, he said, tugging his gloves tighter. Let's finish what you started. Shadow moved immediately, nose low to the ground, weaving between patches of dormant grass and half-submerged leaves. Daniel followed, boots crunching through the thin frost. The path was faint, just a worn dip in the undergrowth, but it curved steadily back toward the western bank of the lake, right where the inlet narrowed, where the brush grew too thick for the original search teams to bother with. They hadn't had Shadow. The dog stopped suddenly. No growl, no whine. Just a subtle stillness that felt louder than sound. His ears stood tall, his body tensed. Then he barked. The sound cracked through the air, sharp and immediate. It wasn't a warning, it was a signal. Daniel stepped forward fast, crouching beside the spot where Shadow had begun to paw at the earth near the base of a thicket of reeds. The air here smelled different. Damp, yes, but layered with something metallic and old, gasoline, maybe, and oil. Shadow dug gently. Daniel pushed the brush back and saw it, a child's shoe. Blue canvas, soaked and stiff with mud, the laces frayed. The side had been torn in a clean, sharp line, not shredded, not chewed. The rip was angled, thin, like it had caught on something. Something manufactured. Daniel didn't touch it yet. He scanned the area. Just beyond the reeds, barely visible beneath the frozen waterline, a slick shimmer of oil floated, breaking apart in slow, oily rainbows. Not old, still moving, and half buried near the base of a tree stump, a cut length of rope, frayed, dirty, stained with the same dark fluid. Shadow sat beside the shoe, unmoving, as if to guard it. Daniel pulled out an evidence bag and carefully used a gloved hand to lift the shoe inside. The material resisted, stiff with exposure. But the size, the style, it matched the ones from Caleb's school photo, no doubt. He crouched beside Shadow. "You were trying to pull him back, weren't you?" Shadow's tail gave a single, low thump against the ground. Daniel looked out towards the lake. The wind blew colder here. The inlet was silent, still. But the evidence was no longer silent. A ripped shoe, rope cut, not rotted, oil still fresh, drugs buried nearby. Caleb hadn't wandered off by accident. He'd seen something, maybe too much, and Shadow had been there, trying to stop it. The report had said the boy drowned. But how had he gotten in the water? Why was there no mention of rope? Why hadn't this part of the lake been searched thoroughly? Because they thought they knew the story. A curious boy. A loyal dog. A tragic mistake. But that wasn't the story at all. Back at the station, Daniel spread the evidence out across the table in the incident room. The shoe, the pouch of drugs, the rope fragment, photos of the dock, the sketchbook. And now, something else. He had gone through the call logs from the night Caleb disappeared. One stuck out. An anonymous tip placed at 2:17 a.m. claiming suspicious activity near the old dock. It had never been followed up, buried in paperwork. The call had come from a blocked number. Shadow lay in the corner, his body calm but his eyes sharp. Daniel paced. You saw them. The boat, the handoff, that faceless figure Caleb drew, that wasn't just imagination. He paused, then looked at Shadow. You barked once the night I found you. You barked today. Same sound, same look. You're not barking for noise. You're barking when something matters. Shadow didn't move, but his ears lifted. He was listening. Daniel leaned against the table. So here's what I think happened. He said aloud, letting the words form as if speaking to the room. Caleb followed you out. Maybe he wasn't supposed to. Maybe he was chasing fireflies or being a kid. But then he saw something. Someone using the lake for a drop, a boat, a bag, a deal. He glanced at the rope. They spotted him. Tried to scare him. Maybe more. Maybe they grabbed him. Maybe he ran. And you... He looked at Shadow. You tried to stop them. You fought. You chased. You barked. Shadow blinked. And they left him. Daniel finished quietly. Left him to drown and ran. And everyone assumed it was your fault. A long silence filled the room. Then, from the corner, Shadow stood and walked over. He pressed his head gently against Daniel's leg, a gesture that said, You're finally seeing it. Later that night, Daniel stepped outside for air. The sky was ink black, the stars choked out by cloud. But the cold was clean, the kind that cleared your head. Footsteps behind him. He turned. Claire Monroe, one of the newer deputies, stood at the edge of the lot. Tall, lean, mid-30s, sharp-eyed. She carried herself like someone who didn't waste time. Heard you've been out near the old dock again, she said. Daniel nodded. Found more? More? A shoe, cut rope, oil, drugs. She raised an eyebrow. You report it to the chief? Not yet. Why not? Because I'm not sure who else knew it was there. She studied him for a long moment. Then, you think this ties to Caleb? I think it was never an accident, he said. And Shadow's the only reason we're learning any of it. Claire looked past him, through the window of the station where Shadow sat, calm and alert. That dog's smarter than most people I know, she muttered. Daniel smiled slightly. He's not done yet. He looked up at the sky, and for the first time in weeks, the clouds began to break. It was just past midnight when the final plan took shape. The old dock lay silent under a moonless sky, shrouded in a fog that seemed to breathe on its own. Trees hunched along the shoreline like old witnesses, their branches creaking softly in the wind. The only light came from a single flashlight far in the distance, flickering like a firefly between shadows. Officer Daniel Reeves crouched behind a downed pine at the edge of the trail, binoculars pressed to his eyes, his breath shallow and steady. Beside him, Deputy Claire Monroe shifted in the dark, adjusting the grip on her sidearm. Her nerves were solid, her breathing even, but she kept glancing towards the tree line. Behind them, half sunken into the brush, Shadow lay still as stone. His body was low, ears pricked, eyes focused. Not a sound came from him, not even the faintest breath. He didn't need orders. He understood the stakes. "They're late," Claire murmured. "They'll come," Daniel replied. Shadow's scent trail was fresh 2 hours ago. Something moved through here recently. Claire adjusted the earpiece connected to dispatch. "Backup is 10 minutes out." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We may not have 10. They watched the dock. A minute passed, then 2, and then movement. 3 figures emerged from the trees opposite the dock, carrying duffel bags. Their shapes were broad, muffled in heavy jackets and gloves. One moved ahead of the others, scanning the area with a flashlight whose beam danced over the water. Another crouched by the boat tied to what was left of the dock, checking the lines. The third stood back, hands in pockets, posture easy. Too easy. Daniel recognized the walk, the slope of the shoulders, the faint limp. Dean Garvey, the local mechanic, a man who had fixed cars and outboards for half the town, known for his casual jokes, cheap coffee, and a crooked smile. He'd been to the Sloane house before, more than once, said he liked kids. Daniel's blood ran cold. "That's him," he whispered. "The one in the sketchbook." The man on the dock, Claire squinted. "You sure?" "Positive." Then came the snap. A twig, broken underfoot. Someone had shifted too quickly. Claire's head whipped around. "Left side," she breathed. The man by the boat froze. His flashlight darted to the tree line. "Who's there?" Daniel signaled Claire with a hand. They moved to split. She circled right. Daniel kept low and straight. But the man by the boat wasn't waiting. He reached into his coat and pulled a pistol. Claire raised her voice. "Police! Drop the weapon!" The shout ripped the silence. Chaos followed. The man turned, gun raised. But he didn't get the shot off. Shadow exploded from the darkness. Like a bolt of lightning born from silence, he launched from cover and slammed into the man's side. The gun fired into the trees, wide and wild. The man shouted, staggered, tried to swing. Too late. Shadow's jaws locked on his arm, dragging him down into the mud, ripping the pistol free. Claire moved fast. "Hands where I can see them," she yelled. Dean Garvey reached for something. Another weapon. A knife. Daniel tackled him from behind, driving him into the cold, damp earth. The duffel bag spilled open, bundles of cash and plastic-wrapped powder tumbling across the dock. Shadow stood over the first man, growling low, the man frozen beneath him, bleeding and still. More officers came running from the road. Flashlights lit up the trees. Radios squawked. One of the suspects tried to flee but was taken down hard by a K9 unit from backup. Dean Garvey lay face down, gasping into the dirt. Daniel pulled him up by the collar. "You were there the night Caleb died," he said, his voice low and even. Garvey didn't answer. "You saw him. Or he saw you." Still nothing. Then a half-smile tugged at the corner of Garvey's mouth. "You've got no proof." Daniel didn't blink. "We'll see." Later, as the suspects were loaded into separate cruisers and the scene secured, Claire walked over to where Shadow sat, panting hard but upright. His coat was damp, flecks of mud caked along his legs. The bandage from his old injury had come loose, but he didn't seem to care. "You saved my life," she said. Shadow blinked once. Daniel approached, hand resting on the dog's back. "He's done more than that," Daniel said. "He brought us here." He waited. He remembered, and he stopped it from happening again. Claire knelt and scratched behind Shadow's ear. "That scar on his leg? It's not the only one, is it?" Daniel shook his head. "No, but he's not done yet." In the glow of headlights, amid the chaos of evidence bags, radio chatter, and zip-tied suspects, Shadow sat tall. Not barking, not chasing, just watching, holding the line like he always had, like he always would. The conference room at Edgefield Police Department felt too quiet. A soft hum came from the overhead light, and the muted scent of coffee lingered from a forgotten mug in the corner. A whiteboard stood behind the table, wiped clean, but Daniel could still see the faint outline of what had been there: maps, timelines, pieces of a puzzle that was no longer missing. Outside, a low winter wind brushed along the window pane. Inside, the air was still, heavy. Daniel stood with his arms crossed, facing the door. When it opened, Mark Sloane stepped in first, holding his coat in one hand, his shoulders curved inward, like the past few weeks had aged him more than the years before. His boots scraped quietly on the linoleum. Rebecca followed behind, slow, guarded. Her wool coat was buttoned to the collar, her face sharp as ever, but her eyes had lost their fire. They looked bruised from the inside. They sat without speaking. Daniel remained standing. "I know this isn't easy," he said. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why bring us here?" "Because I think you deserve the truth," he said. "And I think Caleb would have wanted you to hear it." She didn't respond. Daniel pulled a thin file from the table and slid it forward. "Dean Garvey is in custody. He and 2 others were involved in trafficking narcotics through Lake Helmer. Small-time operation. They used the old dock for off-book drops." Caleb stumbled across them. Mark blinked slowly. "You're saying our son, he wasn't a target?" "He wasn't involved, but he was curious. He followed Shadow that night." Daniel paused. "He saw something. Maybe they saw him. Maybe they didn't." But in the panic, Garvey said Caleb ran. "He tried to jump off the dock to get away." Rebecca looked frozen. Daniel added gently, "Shadow went in after him." That's what the marks on the dock show. The scratch patterns, the rope, even the blood on the boat cleat. It matches Shadow, not Caleb. He tried to pull him out. No one said a word. Then the door opened slowly. Shadow entered the room. No leash, no handler, just quiet steps and calm eyes. In his mouth, clutched with the kind of gentleness only a dog could offer, was a piece of red fabric. Worn, faded, frayed at the ends. He padded across the room toward Rebecca. She didn't move. Shadow stopped in front of her, looked up, and gently set the scarf at her feet. Rebecca's breath caught in her chest. She stared at the scarf like it was glowing. Then, slowly, she reached down and lifted it into her hands. She held it like it might fall apart. "This was his," she whispered. "Caleb wore this every winter." Daniel's voice was quiet. "Shadow never let it go. Even after you turned him away, her hands trembled. Her throat worked to form words. I blamed him," she said, voice shaking. "I needed someone to blame." And he just stood there, waiting for us to see. Mark rubbed a hand across his face. His eyes were red. Daniel sat down across from them. "You were grieving. That doesn't make you bad people. It makes you human. But Shadow never blamed you. He just waited. Because that's what he does. He stays." The scarf slipped slightly from Rebecca's hands as she reached out, fingers brushing the thick fur on Shadow's neck. "I thought I knew what guilt looked like," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "But it was loyalty." I couldn't see it. Shadow leaned gently into her touch. We don't need punishment, Daniel said. We don't need more loss. What we need now is forgiveness. Rebecca nodded slowly. Mark's voice cracked. We're sorry, boy. Shadow didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply sat beside them, as if he'd never left. Later, Daniel and Shadow walked down the hallway towards the back of the station. The air outside had begun to warm, just slightly, enough for the first signs of melt to form along the gutters. Shadow's tail wagged gently. You did good in there, Daniel said. The dog glanced up, eyes soft but steady. They reached Daniel's office, but before they entered, Claire stepped into the hall. They're still in there, she said, nodding toward the conference room, holding the scarf. Sitting in silence, Daniel exhaled. Sometimes silence is the only way grief lets go. Claire looked down at Shadow. You didn't just bring down a criminal ring, she said. You brought them back to their son. Shadow gave a soft huff. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into the office. Because his job wasn't done. And never would be. The sun broke gently over Edgefield that morning, as if it too knew the town needed softness. Main Street had never been this quiet on a Saturday. Shop fronts were shuttered not because of grief, but out of reverence. Flags lined the street, half-mast and still. In front of the old courthouse, rows of folding chairs faced a wooden podium. Behind it stood a stone marker, still veiled by a deep navy cloth. A single microphone waited in the chill morning air. Daniel adjusted his collar and looked down at Shadow sitting beside him. The German Shepherd wore a fresh K9 vest, not military issue, not law enforcement standard, but something custom, something earned. On the patch stitched across the side were just 3 words: he stayed loyal. People had begun to gather. Families, kids holding their parents' hands, veterans with canes and medals pinned to old jackets, teens who once crossed the street to avoid the big, silent dog that paced behind Daniel's truck. They were all here now, and so was the wind. It carried the kind of hush that only visited small towns on days like this, where memory and truth finally walked side by side. The mayor stepped forward first. She wasn't a politician today. Her voice shook with the weight of someone who had grown up with Caleb, who had watched his family shatter and then begin, finally, to heal. We remember Caleb Sloan today, she said, a boy who loved the lake, who carried a camera everywhere, who once told his teacher that if dogs had souls, then Shadow had the biggest one of all. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The mayor gestured toward the covered plaque. We also honor the one who didn't give up, who didn't run, who stayed, even when it cost him everything. The cloth was pulled away, gasps, then silence. The plaque was simple. Etched into the stone was a relief of a dog in mid-stand, alert, proud, but not fierce. Beside it, the words, "He didn't bark for glory. He barked for the ones who stayed loyal." Rebecca stood from the front row. Her eyes were glassy but steady. She walked toward the podium, paused, then turned, not to the crowd, but to Shadow. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner," she said, "but we see you now." Shadow tilted his head slightly, ears forward. Daniel stepped forward, holding a framed certificate in both hands. He addressed the crowd, but his eyes were on Shadow. This town once pushed him away. He came back anyway. This badge isn't about forgiveness. It's about recognition. He knelt, clipped a small silver tag to the corner of Shadow's vest. K9 Shadow, honorary service dog. For bravery, loyalty, and an unwavering bond. The crowd didn't clap at first. It was too sacred a moment. But then one child, a little girl in a bright green coat, stepped forward and placed a single sunflower at the base of the plaque. She looked at Shadow and whispered something only the front row could hear. "Thank you for not giving up." The applause started with a few hands. Then it grew, not wild, not roaring, just steady, like a heartbeat. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the chairs were folded and stored, Daniel and Shadow remained. People came up in quiet pairs, patting the dog, shaking Daniel's hand. Even those who once blamed him, even those who had thrown words like knives in the dark. Mark Sloane stood nearby, silent for most of the afternoon. He approached slowly, holding something in his hand. A small leather collar, faded. The nameplate still read Caleb. He knelt beside Shadow, and for a long moment just looked at him. "He waited for you," Daniel said gently. Mark nodded. "I know." He pressed the collar into Daniel's palm. "I think he'd want him to have it." Shadow stepped forward, not demanding, not hesitant, just present, the way he always was. Daniel clipped the collar onto Shadow's vest, just beneath the badge. A breeze stirred the plaque behind them. And the town remembered. Morning at the lake arrived wrapped in gold. The same lake where everything had started. The grief, the silence, the mystery. Now it stood still, holding the light like a mirror. Not a ripple, not a breeze. The water was as quiet as the space between two heartbeats. Daniel sat on the old bench Caleb once carved his initials into. The wood was worn smooth by time and weather, but the letters, CS, remained. Soft, but unmistakable. His hand rested on Shadow's back. The dog lay beside him, stretched out on the cool earth. Not stiff, not still, just resting. Eyes half closed, breathing slow, his head turned toward the lake as if still guarding something. Or someone. No vest, no badge today. Just the dog. Just the man. And just the quiet. Daniel didn't speak for a long time. There was no need. When he finally did, it was barely above a whisper. "I used to come here and see everything I'd lost. Now I see everything I found." Shadow didn't move, but his ears twitched slightly. He was listening. He always did. Daniel's voice thickened. "I wasn't supposed to bring him home. He was broken. Dangerous, they said. But the truth is, I was the broken one." He glanced down at Shadow, then up at the sky, the way people do when they're speaking to both heaven and memory. "I never told anyone this," he said, "but the night before I found him, I was thinking about leaving everything behind. I had packed the truck. I had a place in mind. No one would have missed me." He stopped, swallowed. But then came this dog, covered in ash, eyes full of fire and sorrow. And somehow, in that ruined shell, he knew I was still here. Still worth something. The wind picked up, only slightly, enough to rustle the grass, enough to move memory. He didn't save me by fighting. He didn't need to, he just stayed. Shadow let out a soft exhale, the kind that came not from exhaustion, but from peace. For the first time in years, his body was still. No twitches, no guarding, no haunted dreams. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a piece of worn cloth. Faded red, torn at the edges. Caleb's scarf. He laid it gently on the bench between them. "We can stop chasing ghosts now," Daniel said quietly. "You brought him home." A pair of ducks landed on the lake. Ripples spread, slow and wide. Daniel stayed beside Shadow for another hour. Neither spoke. One didn't need to. The other had said enough. As the sun crept higher, Daniel finally stood. He bent down, pressed his forehead gently to Shadow's, and held it there. "Rest now, buddy. You've done more than anyone ever asked." Shadow didn't move, didn't need to, because peace, once earned, doesn't need to announce itself. As Daniel walked back toward the truck, he stopped once, looking over his shoulder. The bench, the dog, the lake. It was all still there. And yet, everything had changed. A voiceover begins to rise, soft and deliberate, asking not for tears, not for applause, but for memory. What's your story with a loyal pet? The screen fades slowly to black. Then a single sentence appears. He stayed when no one else did. And beneath it, one more line. Follow our channel for more stories of loyalty, courage, and the dogs who never gave up. This is for the ones who stayed. This is for the German Shepherd.